GP with special interest in metabolic health. Some of you probably remember me from last year. And I've been a GP for a very long time, 23 years now, and I work in North Brisbane. I'm also the founder of Whole Food Revolution. Um, Whole Food Revolution. And I just want to tell you briefly about how I came to be in this space. When I was going through my perimenopausal years in my late 40s, early 50s, I really, really struggled. I was gaining weight, gaining weight, particularly around the middle, despite whatever I did. And I joke that I was turning into my mother, apple shaped with love handles. And even though I hid it well with loose fitting clothes, I was not comfortable. I slept so badly. I used to get up 3 to 4 times every single night. And I snored like a trooper. And seriously, this is what happened in our bedroom. Okay, my poor husband. I used to suffer from heartburn. And the biggest issue, though, was brain fog. I couldn't remember things. And, at work, if I left my workstation, I couldn't remember medical conditions or names of medications. And it really worried me that I would forget how to be a doctor. And now looking back, I had so many little, stickers and various things to jog my memory. But the most worrying thing was when my blood tests revealed that I was pre-diabetic and very much pointing towards a future of heart disease. Now, I have a very strong family history of type 2 diabetes. My mother was diagnosed at the age of 52, and all her family died of diabetes-related complications. And, I knew that this was where I was heading. And it was terrifying. And particularly because I'd always considered myself to be healthy. I exercised like a maniac, and I thought I was eating well. I mean, I was definitely low fat. So I knew that I had to do something different. But what? But what? And when I discovered low carb, that wasn't easy either because my background is I'm from Sri Lanka, and Sri Lankan food is always high in starchy foods. So, but because nothing had worked for me so far, really adopting, I have 4 principles that I guide my patients through. It's whole food, prioritize protein, low carb, and healthy fat. And using these principles, really within 3 to 6 months, I completely changed my life. I lost my weight, particularly everything around the belly. I do not snore. I've snored for 25 years, and now in my mid 50s, I do not snore. I don't have heartburn. My cognitive capacity is so much better. I couldn't be here today doing this talk with you if if I was that person 5 years ago. And most importantly, when I checked my blood test just 3 months later, I had completely reversed my metabolic markers. I'm no longer pre-diabetic, and all my markers have improved. So I have completely transformed my future. So this is what brought me here. And just the realization that simple strategies can make such a big difference in a person's life is what has brought me to this space today. So today, I am going to talk about white poison. Now, there are lots of white poisons out there, right? But I think what I'm going to talk about is probably the worst of the lot, mainly because it is so widely used and people are unaware of the problems it causes. And those problems, the dangers are so insidious. So, which white poison am I talking about? None other than table sugar or sucrose. Now, this statement or quote made by Dr. Robert Lustig, who's a pediatric endocrinologist in the US, who is very well known for his stance on sugar and trying to educate the public. This, I imagine that this is a little bit confronting this statement, sugar is the poison we feed our children and call it love. But isn't it true? How many times, every time, we are hurt or upset or sad or hopeless, whatever emotion, it's always linked to sugar. That's how we comfort ourselves. Okay. And this is what we do. We give it to our children as a snack, as a treat. And that's the idea that we kind of keep on with, isn't it? That sugar is used as some form of, it just makes us feel better. And to this day, in my medical practice, there's 10 doctors now. I cannot stop the nurses giving our 4-year-olds lollipops when they have their immunizations because it's so ingrained, isn't it? It's without thought. We just use it. That is what if somebody's in hospital, we take chocolates. If somebody's sad, we give chocolates or, whatever. It's always around this. So this is why I think sugar is probably the worst of the white poisons. So now, who can relate, let me see, to this little girl?
Ice cream for her birthday party. Quickly, let go. Let go. Let go. You're gonna help me bring ice cream for her birthday party.
Oops. Need to get going. Next one. So, that we can all relate to that, can't we? This, you have a taste of this sweetness and it's like, I want more, right? I mean, it's so hard to stay away from it. So why are certain foods addictive? So to our prehistoric ancestors, the ability to overeat gave an evolutionary advantage. Overeating carbohydrate and fructose, in rich tubers, fructose-rich tubers and fruit in the summer and autumn meant that they were able to gain fat mass, which helped them to get through difficult winters. And this is why we are so highly motivated to seek out fattening foods because it's inbuilt within us, it's ingrained within us. Today's food is hyper palatable and it's designed by the food manufacturers to be that way, so that we eat more. The more we eat, the more profit there is for them. And more of our food is made in factories. And it's a combination of salt, sugar, and fat that humans simply find irresistible. So in this modern food environment, where there's so much availability of this food, it's different from our ancestors, where they had to search for these, and that's what drove our prehistoric ancestors to look, because we were driven to find this. But now that drive is still within us, but in this environment where food is plenty, where this hyperpalatable food is so irresistible. So no wonder we cannot resist. Okay. And we can't resist overeating. So we overeat. We have problems with addiction and we gain weight. We become obese. The chronic illness epidemic. It's just one huge mess. Okay. So what is the problem with sugar? Sugar, table sugar, is made up of one molecule of glucose and it's linked to one molecule of fructose. So it's this molecule here. So this is glucose and this is fructose, okay? When low fat was introduced, I think around about the 1950s, what happened was that all the natural fats were taken out of the food and that meant that the food just became awful. You couldn't eat it. So what the food industry did was they added sugar into the foods to make it more palatable. Now, to be fair, I don't think that scientists knew at the time how the dangers and the harms that sucrose could cause. So what happened was that this massively increased the availability and consumption of sugar, in particular fructose. And high consumption of fructose directly leads to insulin resistance, and I will talk about that in a minute. However, eating natural fruits really only contribute very small amounts of fructose to our diet. So if that's the only fructose that you're getting, I really am not worried. But if you're eating the fructose that comes from table sugar or from the processed food industry, that is the concern. So what contributes to the toxicity of table sugar? So firstly, one is fructose, how fructose is metabolized, and the impact of fructose on aging. So let's have a look at fructose metabolism. Now, I apologize for this. There's so much written here, but it's a lot to say. So firstly, fructose cannot be used by any cell in the body for energy. I'm going to repeat that. Fructose cannot be used by any cell in the body for energy. Once it's in the body, only the liver can metabolize fructose. Excessive fructose puts a significant pressure on the liver because no other organs can help. And in the liver, fructose is converted into fat. This is exactly what happens with alcohol. High levels of fructose will cause a fatty liver. Okay. And we know that fatty liver is such a massive problem in Australia today. I think it's 40% of adult Australians have fatty liver. And if there's fat in the liver simply cannot do its job. And the fatty liver triggers insulin resistance. Okay, and just to go back a bit, when I graduated 27 years ago, a fatty liver was nearly always due to alcohol excess. Now it is nearly always, not always, but it is predominantly due to what we're eating. So fatty liver triggers insulin resistance. Now, I just want to sidestep a little bit because I want to explain something. Now, let's talk about type 1 diabetics. This is different to type 2 diabetes. In type 1 diabetes, the body does not produce enough insulin. Okay. And insulin is the hormone that tells the body to store fat, to store glucose. It's a storage hormone. So if there's not enough insulin in the body can't store fuels, it can't store energy. So all that energy and fuel is in the bloodstream. So in ancient times, if someone developed type 1 diabetes, it was without a doubt a death sentence because there was no way that this individual could hold on to energy. It was just literally in the blood. Okay. So the body knows how dangerous it is if we can't hold on to energy, if we can't produce adequate insulin to hold on to energy. So just keep that in mind. So I'm coming back to that. So now I want to give you a little bit of an analogy. So let's say you are a little bit of a shopaholic, okay? You love to shop. I don't care what it is, but you just love to shop. So you have bought yourself a nice new wardrobe and it's sitting in one corner of your bedroom, okay? And every weekend, off you go to the shops and buy yourself whatever it is that you fancy. And you bring it in and you put it into your wardrobe. So now, as the weeks go by, this wardrobe is getting pretty full. And as time goes on, you need to exert a little bit of pressure to close these doors. And a few months later, you actually need to push these doors really tightly shut because if not, all the stuff in the wardrobe just literally falls out. Okay. So in this analogy, the wardrobe is the liver The stuff you put in it is the fat, and the pressure, the amount of pressure that you need to exert to keep these doors shut is the amount of insulin that the body is producing. So what happens is that in someone on a high sugar diet, the liver is crammed full of fat, and insulin tries to force more and more fat and sugar into the liver. It takes higher and higher levels of insulin to move the same food energy into the liver. And continuously high levels of insulin is needed to keep this fat and sugar in the liver. Because if not, if the insulin levels start to drop, the stored fat and sugars come whooshing out. And the body knows how dangerous that can be. So to compensate, the body keeps raising its insulin levels. And this is what we call insulin resistance. Okay. So the problem is when it comes to sucrose or table sugar, there's two elements. Sucrose is 50-50 mix of glucose and fructose. So the glucose directly stimulates insulin and triggers obesity, and fructose leads to fatty liver, and that triggers insulin resistance and leads to obesity. Okay. And this can fester for years and decades before it becomes obvious. And, a fatty liver is not something that we can poo-poo. It is a really concerning condition because when you've got fat in the liver cells can't do its job. And if you've got something that's not supposed to be there, the inflammatory reaction, the body's inflammatory processes start to kick in. And then what happens is that the inflammatory reaction starts working in the liver, and over time, so you get the fat in the liver, then you get an inflammatory reaction, which causes scar tissue in the liver. And that scar tissue is what eventually leads to liver cirrhosis. If you get liver cirrhosis, there's a potential for one of two things: liver cancer and or liver failure. So this is not something to be taken lightly, particularly as this is something that is so easy to be reversed, particularly in the early stages. So please, if you have a fatty liver, take this seriously. This is something that you can reverse. So there's another reason why sugar or fructose in particular is such a problem. It's to do with aging. Now, aging is a natural, inevitable process in the body. And you can't stop aging. Oh, well, you can, as Robert Lustig says, you be dead. Okay. So, we won't talk about that. But the way we age is through a very simple process called glycation. And this refers to browning or damage of protein when it sits together with a carbohydrate. Anywhere in the body, in the blood, in the cells, if you've got a protein and a carbohydrate, glucose, fructose, whatever, sitting together with a protein, that protein can get damaged. And these damaged proteins are very aptly named AGEs, advanced glycation end products. And we have this, our body is the most amazing thing. It has actually got this cellular waste processing system that removes these AGEs, okay? But if these damaged proteins build up faster than we can remove it, that's when then you get accumulation of these AGEs, and that's what leads to a cell and organ dysfunction. Okay, so the problem is that fructose drives glycation 7 times faster than glucose. So fructose significantly hastens aging. So aging can be slowed down by whole food lifestyle when you avoid sugar and refined carbohydrates. So it's a simple thing to do. Well, it's not simple, but it's something that can be done. Okay. How much sugar do we actually consume? An average Australian has 16 teaspoons of added sugar per day, added sugar. And it mostly comes in the form of these sugary drinks or flavored foods. Teenagers consume much more. A 600 ml bottle of soft sugar, a soft drink, has 16 teaspoons of added sugar. And if one bottle a day is consumed, that amounts to 23 kilograms of sugar per year. And how many people, particularly our young people, do you know that have far more than just one 600 ml bottle of soft drink per day? The WHO recommends 6 teaspoons per day. But in actual fact, do we need sugar at all? Well, fructose doesn't do us any good whatsoever. I mean, it is completely useless. No cell in the body can use it. And glucose, well, our body can make all the glucose that we need. So we don't need any sugar, really. Now, this is a very interesting slide. It made me a little bit worried, really. It is from 2012, and the data source is from United Nations. But this is the average consumption of sugar per year per person. How did Australians consume so much more than our US counterparts? Is that possible? I mean, I was really shocked about this. I hope that things have changed now. But even at one point that Australians were consuming so much sugar per year per person is staggering, isn't it? 40 kilograms of sugar per person per year. So I just want to talk briefly about how to read labels, because I think sometimes it can get quite confusing, and we have a very, very easy way of doing this. This comes from Diet Doctor, and I'm just going to go through it very briefly. So when we're looking at labels, just look at the 100 grams or 100 mils per column, only because it's easier to compare foods when you look at it here. So there's only 3 things that you need to ask yourself. Is there less than 5 grams of sugar? Is there less than 5 grams of carbs? And are there less than 5 ingredients? If you can tick this to tick to all of those questions, then this is a reasonable food to eat. In the ideal world, you wouldn't actually have a food with a label on it, because that's not a whole food. But that's not the most practical thing. I think it's hard to be that idealistic. So I think it's just, if you have some guidance on what to look for, I think that's easy. So look at this particular product. I think this is a loaf of bread. So sugars, yeah, fine, 2.4. Carbohydrates, 42. So what's the problem here? The problem here is that any carbohydrate, whether it's sweet or not sweet, gets converted into glucose in the body. So you need to take this into consideration, because this is what drives up insulin, okay? And in terms of the ingredients, the more ingredients you have in a food, that means the more it's been tampered with. It's been processed. Something has been added to it. And so you really want to keep to less than 5 ingredients. So that's a really quick and easy way of reading labels. 5, 5, 5. So hopefully that's something that you can take away today. But also, the food industry is so cunning. They know exactly how to hide things away. So you really need to look at, these are 75 different names for sugar. So all of this, you might just see sugar, but then all of these things are hidden away somewhere. The other thing that you might want to look at is if there are numbers, or if there are words that you simply can't pronounce. That's you should be those are you shouldn't be eating this has been produced in a factory. These are chemicals that you are eating. So I think if you can kind of keep to these guidelines, I think you should be safe. All right, now this is the big question, isn't it? What about artificial and natural sweeteners? Now I do really I'm a little bit fanatical about this. I have a real bugbear here. And I did talk about it to some extent, I think, last time when I was here. But let's look at the types of sweeteners. There are artificial sweeteners, natural sweeteners, and sugar alcohol. So artificial sweeteners are things like saccharin, aspartame, acesulfame, potassium, sucralose, which is mainly found in diet drinks and other sugar-free processed foods. And the natural sweeteners are things like agave nectar, stevia, monk fruit, those kind of things. Um, and yes, they originally they came from a plant. And then sugar alcohols are things like polyols, they're from plants, and they don't usually contain either sugar or alcohol. So I don't know why they're named like that. But anyway, they're sugar alcohols. And these are things like erythritol and xylitol. And these have much less calories and less sweetness than sugar. And they're usually mixed in with other sweeteners and can cause issues with for people who have irritable bowel syndrome with a FODMAP intolerance, but they're quite popular as they're low calorie. So, okay, so what's the problem with these? Okay, so the problem is how they're processed. Okay, so the artificial sweeteners are artificial, they've been made in a lab. Now, the natural sweeteners, yes, at one point they came from a plant, but from that plant to actually make the sweetener, that happened in a lab, that happened in a factory. You can't just squeeze an agave nectar and get or stevia and somehow get your, whatever you find in a packet. That's not what happens. It has been made in a factory. Okay. So that is the problem. And I'll talk about why that is a problem. So this, I just want to show you here. So this is studies done in the 2000s, early 2000s, reveal that consuming diet drinks. So diet drinks, this is particularly, diet drinks had mainly artificial sweeteners, increase the levels of obesity, strokes, heart disease, metabolic syndrome by 30 to 40%. Okay, so if you look at this graph here, this is looking at the US sugar intake versus obesity prevalence over a period of 30 years. So if you look at the sugar consumption, which is in yellow, you can see that around about the 2000s, sugar consumption started to go down, but obesity rates continued to increase. And you can see here that in the 2000, around about then, that artificial sweetener use started to skyrocket. So that is, that's what drove the, plus I think the other thing that they say is industrial seed oil. So those two together drove this epidemic of obesity. So, and why is this? It's because it's insulin and not calories that drive the obesity and drives obesity and metabolic syndrome. So, because it's sweeteners may increase insulin. So, I'm going to stop here and just give you my take. There was an amazing book by Mark Schatzker called The Dorito Effect. And in that, he describes this phenomenon really well. And I very much encourage you to read his two books. So, The Dorito Effect and The End of Craving, amazing books. So what he says is that if you think about our prehistoric ancestors going back, many hundreds of thousands of years ago. So, we now currently 2024, we consider ourselves modern humans, right? Modern humans. But our genetics are exactly the same as those humans that lived 300,000 years ago. The Homo sapiens, okay, we are Homo sapiens altogether. So in that time frame, if you condense that 300,000 years into the space of 1 year, this time that we're living in, the last 75 years, also called the commercial age by some, is literally one footstep in time. One footstep. Okay. So even though we're living in this very modern space age, I think Dr. Pran calls it a space age environment for food, our bodies are trapped in this prehistoric genetics, okay, that our bodies cannot process these factory-made foods. We can't process it. It might take another 100, 200, 300,000 years before our genetics can do that. So it's a real concern. So, and really, I worry, that we are um, mindlessly using these natural sweeteners because, it's somehow natural. But what is it going to do to us? And what is it going to do to our future generations? Because what Mark Schatzer, he gives a beautiful analogy. Well, before the analogy, this is what he says. If you think about our ancestor who lived maybe 100,000 years ago, if they ate a sweet food, what would that be? Fruit, honey, um, dates, those kind of things, right? And that's all they had. They had it, and they usually would have had it around summer or autumn, and they would have had probably quite a reasonable bit of it if when they came across it. But the brain always knew these foods. We know when you eat them, they come with calories. We do gain weight. If we overeat any of these, we gain weight. The brain knew that. So the brain knew, okay, this person, because in all that these 300,000 years, the human brain, its most important work is to protect this body, to make sure it gets through year by year, to keep account of what's going on. So the brain needs to know exactly what's happening. And the brain knew this person ate this many calories, there's this much fat, this person has a nice big tick during the winter months. If there's food scarcity, it's not a problem. There's enough fat here to get this person through. Okay, so that was fine. But think about what happens now. Remember, we are the same genetic makeup as that prehistoric ancestor. Now, sometimes we eat sweet and it comes with calories. And sometimes we eat sweet and there are no calories. Okay, what happens to the brain? Can it keep track? Can it say, what happens? The brain is confused. The brain cannot keep a track of what's going on. The brain doesn't know anymore whether this individual has enough fat to get them through the winter. Okay, so the analogy that Mark Schatzer gives is imagine you have a car that runs with, say, petrol, diesel, electricity, whatever, but the gas gauge or whatever it is that you have is not working. What will that do? What will that make you do? For me, if I knew that my diesel gauge wasn't working, I would be terrified that I wouldn't be able to get to work and back, have a distance to drive. And I'd be pumping diesel every day. Because what if I run out? What if I don't make it to work, right? Or wherever. So that is exactly what happens in the human body. The brain cannot predict, therefore, it will drive you to eat more. It might be today, it might be next week, next month, but it will ensure, because that is what the human brain does. It keeps us safe. It will drive you to eat more so that it can guarantee your safety over those winter months. So really think about it. We're putting all this stuff into our bodies, stuff that no other human in history has eaten. And just for that footstep in time, we're somehow, gorging these natural sweeteners. It's, just think about what potential damage we might be doing. The other concern is that this is artificial sweeteners. They are highly addictive. And there was a study done in mice looking at artificial sweeteners and cocaine, and artificial sweeteners were more addictive than cocaine. In saying that, I'm not saying that you should never, ever, ever let anything, any sweetness pass through your lips. I mean, that's not what I'm saying. But if you are consistently on a low carb lifestyle, using a sweetener as a treat from time to time should not cause a problem. So today, I think you've enjoyed or you are going to enjoy some sweet treats. Fine, let it be a treat. Or the other time it's used is when if you are trying to wean off sugar. But it has to be a weaning off process. You need your a sweet palate needs to change. Otherwise, if you keep using these, you will never get away from this craving. So I hope you enjoyed. I'm going to stop the share. I hope you enjoyed this, and I haven't been too radical or anyway. Yeah, so I do say this is something that I really feel strongly about. But I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you learned something from it. My